Chelsea are officially champions of the world as the Club World Cup comes to a close, and they celebrate with this incredible trophy alongside Donald Trump. And so I'm sure everybody to do with Chelsea is thrilled by this tournament. But the question is, has it been a success or failure from FIFA's point of view, the general footballing public, and the clubs involved? We're going to take a look at some of the statistics, the analysis of the tournament, and what some of the players and managers have said throughout. Of course, if you ask FIFA what they think of the tournament and how successful it was, well, Gianni Infantino said that it was the world's most successful club competition, and it was a very, very great success. He claims that the competition has generated more than 1.5 billion in revenue, which means that the tournament has been successful. And quote, "The golden era of club football has started." This man has no shame. This comes a few weeks after Jurgen Klopp publicly spoke out about it and said that it was the worst idea ever implemented by football. So let's look at some of the information when it comes to the Club World Cup. Let's start off with the crowds, which at the start of the tournament were a major focus from people criticising the tournament on social media. The attendances were low. 4 matches failed to get 10,000 fans in the stadium, with the lowest attendance being a measly 3,412. But there were 15 crowds throughout the tournament of more than 60,000 people, with the highest being PSG when they were playing against Atletico Madrid and they won 4-0. And then, of course, the final had a slightly higher figure. It is the final. It was expected. They had over 81,000 people and, most importantly, a 98% capacity full of the stadium. So here are the best attended Club World Cup matches in terms of attendance and then percentage of the capacity of the stadium. You had Chelsea 3-0 against PSG in the final, which was crazy. And we'll have a very brief look at the final when we go on to that later on. PSG against Atletico Madrid, PSG against Real Madrid, Real Madrid against Borussia Dortmund, and Fluminense against Chelsea. But if we look at the worst attended ones, then you can see that Ulsan against the Sundowns game with 3,400, 13% capacity. Terrible. Pachuca up against Salzburg, Benfica against Auckland, Dortmund against Ulsan, and Wydad against Al Ain. Bayern Munich, Manchester City, and Juventus all played in at least one match with more than 30,000 empty seats. Chelsea and Dortmund in one with almost 50,000, and Atletico Madrid in one with more than 60,000. The Champions League finalists, Inter Milan, played a game that had 54,837 unoccupied seats. Why is this then? Do the fans not care about the tournament, or is it something a little bit more? I would say a bit of both. This is the first iteration of the Club World Cup, and so interest levels are going to be at the lowest that it probably ever will be. I love football. Football is my life. I consume it basically every single day, whether it's through social media, whether it's through watching YouTube videos, or watching actual matches. Premier League, Championship, Internationals, the Champions League, La Liga, Serie A, all of these, I love them. But to me, the Club World Cup still felt like a bit of a pre-season tournament rather than a post-season sort of big finale to what the season had just been. I was actually out in America recently, in Orlando, when one of these games was on. However, we decided to go to an MLS game instead of a Club World Cup game as a family because the ticket prices were just ridiculous. For the MLS, you were paying at most $25 to get the cheapest seats in there. But the Club World Cup game was over $100. And it wasn't as if this was a quarterfinal or anything like that. This was just a random game. And so maybe FIFA overestimated how popular this tournament would be in America, and that's why you saw so many empty seats. As the tournament progressed and you get closer to the final, people are more likely to go to these games than they are if it's just a random group game. And you probably would have seen on social media that a lot of these games, they actually ended up reducing the ticket prices massively just to try and fill seats. So when you have Infantino talking about the average attendance, he doesn't talk about what that attendance would be if the tickets never got sales or reduced prices. You also have to take into account the fact that some of these games were midday on a weekday. The average American citizen isn't going to suddenly care about 2 random teams from across the world and take time out of their work day in order to go and watch it. So it was hard for people that are fans of these clubs to go over because it's so expensive of a trip. And then the people that are in the areas that some of these games were happening during the timings of it also couldn't attend, even if maybe they did actually want to. You had some players like Marc Cucurella and Enzo Fernandez, amongst others, and also some managers, talking about the locations of some of these games and the heat and the weather. The heat was described by multiple players as dangerous, and these conditions detracted from the quality of the matches that the players were trying to actually entertain and play and win in. You also seem to have some of the scheduling based around trying to appeal to European markets, and so they were on at like 8 p.m. UK time, when in reality, again, that just didn't really line up with the people that would be able to go to the games in America. It's why, even though I was in the country, I still didn't really see much of the tournament at all because I was out during the day, and that's when the games were on. And so they scheduled it for the European market, despite hosting it in America, when Europe probably would have had bigger attendances, more interest in it, and then the people in Europe didn't really watch it anyway. They have not released official viewing figures, and I think we all know why. FIFA will probably say something along the lines of, oh, we don't need to prove anything to anyone. We know that it was watched by billions of people. When in reality, if the numbers were really that good, they would release them, and we'd all know how popular this tournament actually was. I feel like you may hear about the viewing figures in 4 years' time if they are significantly higher for the next tournament. You also had some weather delays, which Enzo Maresca called a joke, and other managers and players also commented on. You had some ridiculous scenarios, most notably Chelsea against Benfica. Their game ended 4 hours and 38 minutes after it started. There were 5 minutes remaining of their game, and they got a huge weather delay due to anything in America. Basically, whenever there's lightning within a certain distance, they shut things down. That does also happen in other countries. You saw it in Germany in, I think it was a European game a couple of years ago, but the delays were nowhere near as much or as long as what we saw during the Club World Cup. And so this was the 85th minute. It ended up then going to extra time because Benfica came back after this break, rejuvenated, and managed to score an equaliser. So there is going to be some kind of knock-on effect for all the teams, especially Chelsea, that have gone all the way in this tournament, PSG as well. As they go into the new season, obviously their summer has now been cut shorter than it would have been had they not been participating in the tournament. The likes of Liverpool are probably actually loving the fact that they've managed to just have this proper rest and potentially go and race away with the league next season. So the next question is, did the teams care that were a part of it? Did they want to win this tournament? The simple answer is yes. However, that doesn't mean that they truly cared about the tournament and the trophy and the prestige of it. They cared about the massive prize money. Chelsea made over £100 million from winning the Club World Cup. João Pedro was bought halfway through this tournament, scored goals in the quarters, semi and final, and has basically already paid more than his transfer fee back himself. Man City got knocked out in the last 16, and yet they made 40 to 50 million pounds from this tournament. And so there was a large incentive to win it, to boost your PSR, to boost your transfer budget, and all of those things. You also get a badge on your kit that says that you are world champions for 4 years, because I feel like a lot of people don't actually realise this is like a Club World Cup. That's the name of it. It is only every 4 years. Previously, you had these kind of things happening basically every single summer, and no one cared about them. Remember when Liverpool were playing in it as well as the Cup, and they had to split their team? It was just a mess. This is every 4 years. It's supposed to be the massive culmination of club football, rather than something like the Champions League that does have prestige, but it is every single year. Bernardo Silva spoke about their ambition to win this tournament, and he said, "We have a lot of ambition for this Club World Cup, and we wanted to win it." And he was asked if it hurt as much as being eliminated from the Champions League, and he said, yes, a little bit. So maybe. Arsene Wenger has defended the tournament and said that clearly people were interested because of the amount of people that went to the games and were watching it at home. And he also said, if you make inquiries to all the clubs who were here, then 100% of answers would be that they would want to do it again. That's the best answer of what the clubs think of a Club World Cup. And whilst you can understand why he says that, if the prize pool was not 100 mil for the winner, but it was 10 mil, you would get a very different answer. You see clubs sometimes going on these post-season tours of like Asia and stuff like Man United did straight after the season ended. It's all to bring in money. It's not necessarily because they want to play these games or they enjoy playing them or they care about the prizes that are at stake. It's to bring in revenue for the club, to keep it alive, and to be able to bring in bigger, better players, be able to pay for more infrastructure, stadiums, training grounds, all of that. And there are the likes of Jamal Musiala, who has come out of this Club World Cup tournament, maybe not caring about playing in it, but now is injured for multiple months after getting his leg snapped by Donnarumma. Now, of course, these things could happen in training or in a normal preseason game, but it happened in this tournament. You cannot guarantee that he would have been injured elsewhere. And so after missing out on Florian Wirtz, they're now also without Musiala for the first few months of their season, and Bayern are probably not going to be very happy about that. So how good was the football? Well, there was certainly mismatching when it came to the quality of teams in this tournament. You saw Bayern Munich smashing a semi-pro team, Auckland, 10-0 in the group stages. And that feels like the kind of game that, yeah, you're getting in another team from a different area of the world, but they're not going to compete here. Albeit, they did actually score a goal against Benfica, to be fair to them. But the South American and Saudi teams were surprising a lot of people. Manchester City got knocked out by Al Hilal. The South American teams were undefeated for a chunk of the tournament. Fluminense were really impressive, particularly. Palmeiras also doing pretty well and getting knocked out by the eventual winners Chelsea. Inter Miami and MLS teams were featuring in the tournament. Lionel Messi scoring a free kick. PSG continuing to look like the best team in the world up until the final where Chelsea dismantled them completely. Beating Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, Inter Miami, Bayern, even with 9 men. But you have seen a mixing of cultural sort of play styles from these Brazilian teams, the Saudi teams, the standard European teams, and that does make things a little bit more interesting because going into the tournament, I don't think that the vast majority of European football fans would have expected the Brazilian teams or South American teams in general to do well. So have fans been interested around the world? Is the big question here. We've seen the reasons why FIFA would be interested in it, trying to bring all these clubs and nations together to make as much money as possible and rival the Champions League. And you can see why the clubs would be interested because of the prize money at stake. But we've talked about the players and maybe them not being as interested, but what about the fans? As I said, from my personal point of view, I could not justify paying the money that I would have had to pay to go to a Club World Cup game whilst I was even in the area. And it hasn't gripped me to want to watch all of the games. When there's a Euros on or a World Cup, I try and watch every single minute of every game. Every time the Champions League on, I'm watching it. Every Prem game that's on TV, I have it on. Even if I'm doing something else, I've got it on at the side at a bare minimum. Championship on Friday nights. Midweek, we've got Serie A, we've got La Liga. I try and watch as much football as I can because it is me, it's my life. I love it. It's what I'm passionate for. But I just didn't really care about this tournament. And if you look at the stats online, it feels like a lot of people also felt this way. The BBC report that their live pages and reports for the knockout rounds of the Club World Cup have had between 40 and 50% of the audience that they would normally get for the Champions League equivalent. They are still decent numbers, and so there is still interest, but it's just not quite at the level that Infantino and FIFA would potentially try and make it out to be. One thing that probably has helped is the fact that every single match was available to watch for free in the UK. You could get the DAZN app and watch it through that, and some games were on Channel 5 as well, including the final. DAZN have not replied to BBC requests when it comes to viewing figures. Once again, probably because they're lower than anticipated or they wanted them to be. They bid such a huge amount to get the broadcast rights for this as well. Channel 5 said it was happy with how many people have watched the games it broadcast. Chelsea v LAFC was watched by a peak of 1.6 million people in the UK. Real Madrid's game against Al Hilal was seen by a peak of 1.1 mil. However, in Saudi Arabia, more than 1.5 million people watched their win over Manchester City, even though it kicked off at 4 a.m. local time. And Brazil has also hosted massive numbers in a Copacabana fan fest that had over 100,000 fans throughout the tournament. So maybe the Europeans didn't care about this as much because it's not the Champions League. It's not the peak of football. Whereas these other nations, yes, they have their own independent versions of things like the Champions League, but they don't have one where they're playing against the Real Madrids and Man Cities of the world. So you can understand why they would be more interested than the Europeans. And so maybe FIFA feel like it is a success in terms of fans worldwide, but it's also whether they can grab those European fans that don't currently have an interest in the tournament the next time it comes around in 4 years to actually want to watch it. Will that happen by it moving to Europe? I highly doubt it. We know how FIFA work. They are all about the money, and so I think everybody is predicting the next Club World Cup will be somewhere over in the Middle East. Whether it is Saudi Arabia or a host of different countries, we are yet to see. What about the managers, though? With fatigue, injuries, and squad depth and everything like that, here are a couple of things that the BBC have reported. Many players that are involved have had zero break. As we all know, you basically went straight into this after the end of the season with some international fixtures as well. And you've now got less than a month before you are starting the Premier League back up, which is kind of crazy. Pep Guardiola said, "I try not to think about it, otherwise I will be so anxious. Maybe in November, December, January, ask me. I may say, so listen, we are a disaster, we are exhausted, the World Cup destroyed us." This is the first time it's happened, and so we don't know. This is exactly what I said about Liverpool potentially running away with it, because Man City, Chelsea, potential league contenders might just be all shattered. The PFA's chief executive told BBC Sport it's this feeling of accumulation of competitions that just do not talk to each other and create a calendar that is just nonsensical. Let's see what happens in October, November. That's when you're going to start seeing because you pay the price. This Club World Cup gives us a chance to start looking at the bigger picture. For Bayern Munich, the competition obviously gave them the massive injury to Musiala, and so that's going to impact them more so than just the tiredness. Fortunately, most other teams didn't really get any big injuries, and I think that is more luck than anything else, especially considering the players were all complaining about the conditions, the heat, the weather, the pitches not being at a high level enough. Reece James talking after the final, saying that hopefully for the World Cup, it will be significantly improved from what it's been like for the Club World Cup. There are a couple of different innovations that also happened throughout this Club World Cup that you won't be seeing anywhere else in the world, really. The tournament had some quirky things, shall we say. All of the players got their individual announcement when they came out onto the pitch. Now, this doesn't happen in the MLS. As I say, I went to an MLS game literally whilst this tournament was going on. It's not as if they've taken things from the MLS and plonked it into that and vice versa. The teams just come out. Whereas in the Club World Cup, you had people like Michael Buffer calling out the player names one by one. And as is very American, the biggest games and the biggest events, they don't kick off on time. The final kicked off like 11 minutes late. They also had crazy stuff going on at half-time in the final. We already know that in the World Cup we are getting a half-time show, but we also had one during this time. I can't actually remember, or I didn't know some of the people that were performing. Coldplay were there. I think Doja Cat, was one of them. And it meant that the half-time went on for nearly 25 minutes, which again, that's not normal. And I'm not really sure that anybody was really a fan of it. However, one thing that people were a fan of, there were a couple of different things to do with the officials. VAR decisions were shown in the stadium. Now, that has been happening in the Premier League for the last season, and if there's an offside goal that happens or something like that, it's disallowed. You will get an image of it on the screen afterwards. However, you won't see it for other things. For example, if there's a red card, you're not getting a replay of why that player has been sent off, which in reality you probably should get. But the big thing that people really seem to enjoy ref cam. The refs were wearing like body cams and you would see things from their angle, which at times felt unnecessary when they were showing pretty redundant stuff. But when there were big decisions or goals going in and you saw it from the referee's angle, it's just nice to sort of see things from their eyes, and you can potentially understand if they get a decision wrong. Well, from their point of view, it looked like that was the correct decision. And then you get VAR to intervene and suddenly they get a bit of help, and it makes them feel a bit more human rather than just an official that everyone can slander. And so Chelsea were the ones that came out on top after all of this and just utterly dismantled PSG in the final 3-0. Maresca, masterclass. Come home, please. I know we're probably going to get Cifuentes, but Maresca, you were so good for us. And PSG were looking, up until that game, comfortably like the best team in world football and had done throughout all of 2025, but they just got shut down. Chelsea on the counter-attack were amazing in that game, and Cole Palmer, just big game player, absolutely put himself on the table, showed up when it mattered, gets 2 goals and an assist, and both of his goals just the casual nature, the composure to just pass it into the bottom corner, especially the second one where he fakes a pass, then fakes a shot, then passes it in. He is sublime. The crazy part was the fact that Donald Trump stayed on the stand with them as they did the trophy lift, which you just know that that's going to happen at the World Cup as well. There is a world where, imagine Messi wins back-to-back World Cups. One of them he's been forced to put on like this gown thing, and the next one he's holding it up with Trump. They're both holding the World Cup at the same time. It's just a bit of a mess. But one positive has come out of this ahead of the World Cup. Infantino has talked about the heat and weather, and he did say this after the Club World Cup. Of course, the heat is definitely an issue. It's an issue around the world. I remember it was the same in the Olympics in Paris. Not to the same level as this, though. And in other football games. The conditions need cooling breaks, watering the pitch, and seeing how we can do things better. But we have stadiums in America that are covered, and one in Canada in Vancouver, which is covered, and we will definitely use these stadiums more during the day. So hopefully that means less weather delays and everything like that. There was only one covered stadium at the Club World Cup, whereas the actual World Cup, as it stands, will have a further 4 options. Will they look into changing anything like that ahead of it after seeing the problems with the Club World Cup? We'll see. But so overall, was it a success? Was it interesting? Was it exciting? I think the answer to that question depends on who you're asking. If you ask FIFA, they will say absolutely yes, because they got a ton of eyes on their competition. They're now trying to rival the Champions League and UEFA with their own things and make a club version of the World Cup, and they will think that it's been really successful. They have now crowned a world champion of club football, which we don't normally really see, even if you win the Club World Cup in the past. If you ask the clubs whether they have enjoyed it, well, the ones that have been a part of it will definitely have benefited monetarily, but as Pep Guardiola said, and some of the other journalists and reporters, we'll see as we get into the season. Because if that lack of rest in the summer now costs them massively in the season due to fatigue and injuries, well then maybe even getting that extra money from the Club World Cup, unless you won it, is not going to be worth it. From the fans' perspective, it depends where you're asking around the world. If you look in America, South America, and over in the Middle East, you will have had a lot more interest in this tournament than it seems you got in the UK and the remainder of Europe. The fans of these teams that were there couldn't really go to the games, and they just didn't care about it as much as their leagues and the Champions League, which they're normally watching every few months. Having the tournament available as free to watch was a really, really good move to try and get as many people to watch it as possible. However, I just feel like there are way too many people that, like myself, never really felt that this was anything other than a forced competition that we were supposed to love. Maybe as they innovate and alter and change things going forward and the tournament gains more prestige over the years, sure, maybe I will start to be really excited for the next Club World Cup. But But I think with the disparity of the teams that were facing off against each other, the weather delays, the pitches, the kickoff times, the fact that it just seemed a bit chaotic, it just didn't quite click. And that doesn't mean that it was absolutely horrible, because this is their first attempt at this tournament and turning it into this style and this scale of competition. And so there are going to be negatives alongside the positives. You just have to hope that they actually try and focus on reducing the negatives rather than increasing the few positives that they did have. So let me know your thoughts. How did you find the Club World Cup? Were you watching it avidly? Were you interested in it? Or did you just not really care? Have you maybe grown to like it over the course of the tournament? Or maybe you're now slightly looking forward to the next one? Let me know down below. That is going to be it from me. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.